The Baltimore Ravens offense could be poised to take a major step forward in 2024. We talk about what Todd Monken and Lamar Jackson have to do with it, and so much more coming up next year on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Thank you so much for being here today and making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. So in video form on YouTube, you can like the video, subscribe to the channel. Also in audio form, if you're following along over there, you can subscribe over there as well, wherever you like to listen to your favorite podcasts on your favorite podcasting platforms. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code Locked On NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We're back, a Tuesday edition of Locked On Ravens here, Taco Tuesday, so appreciate everybody checking in here on Locked On Ravens. I hope everybody enjoyed their Memorial weekend. We're back. We've done a bunch of content. If you're just checking back in after the weekend, we did 2 bonus episodes over the weekend, plus we did a Memorial Day show. So after you're done listening to this, go back and listen to some of our other content. We talk about some OTA early storylines, some winners and losers. We also talk about Jamal Adams a little bit more, and also Rashad Bateman. But sticking with the offensive theme, we're going to be talking about why this offense really could be poised to take the next step or take a huge step forward in 2024. We're going to be talking about Lamar Jackson and his comments, Todd Monken, comments from him as well, which we've touched on here and there over the course of the last week, but I really want to do a little bit more of a dive on those. We're also going to be talking a bit about personnel as well. So we'll talk about Lamar Jackson's comments in the first part of the show, his role. Then we'll move into Todd Monken in the second part of the show. Then we'll talk about another move incoming for the Ravens, whether that is a safety move or some other move along those lines. So let's get into this. Let's talk about the Baltimore offense. We know that the Ravens offense, it was year one last year under Todd Monken. And anytime there is a new offensive system, you're bringing in somebody from the outside, it's not going to be all sunshine and rainbows. It's not all going to work 100% of the time. And you're not going to score 40 points every single game. Now, we heard a lot during last offseason about how certain things are going to be different and the offense felt a lot smoother and there were just a lot of wrinkles to it. And that ended up being the case as the year went on. But I think we saw the inconsistencies that were natural. Those were natural first-year offensive inconsistencies where the coach is trying to get used to the players are trying to get used to the coach. That's fine. But it was it was an interesting timing, I guess, because Baltimore is in win now mode. And I'm not saying win now mode teams don't fire coaches. It happens all the time. But the way that dynamic works is if you're a win now team, you don't have as much leeway to necessarily go out there and struggle early. Now, Baltimore obviously came back from it, got the number 1 seed in the AFC, and it didn't really matter or like cost them playoff positioning or anything. But this year 2 under Todd Monken, I expect a bit more consistency from this offense in general, and I expect a lot more when it comes to what the Ravens can do balance-wise. We know this is a run-first offense. That isn't changing, especially when you have Derrick Henry and a player of that caliber coming in the running game. You're not just going to go, oh, hey, we're going to abandon the run game. We're going to be a 40-pass attempts team. That's not going to happen with Derrick Henry in the fold. But Baltimore, they had the most rushing attempts in the league last season. They were 30th in pass attempts. That's been a theme over the course of Lamar Jackson's career, a theme that I personally would like to see balance out a little bit more. That doesn't mean Baltimore has to stop running the football. It doesn't mean Baltimore has to stop being a run-first team. But to see those passing attempts increase, to see Baltimore try to push the ball down the field a little bit more. And the run game is the run game, and that's the strength of this team. You don't want to move away from that completely. But I do think that with Lamar Jackson, again, the work he's put in this offseason, I think it's going to get there. I think that year one, it's always a little wonky in some ways because now I think Todd Monken has had the opportunity to fully take in an offseason here, get some of the personnel he wants, younger athletic offensive linemen. The play calling sheet, I'm sure, is going to be a lot more sophisticated this year for everybody and just a lot more detailed. Not that it wasn't last season, but it just felt like early in the season there were those wrinkles that Baltimore was trying to figure out. They were force feeding the ball to Zay Flowers too much on those screens or reverses, and it wasn't working. So they moved away from that, and that benefited their offense. But some of the things that Lamar Jackson said during OTAs, and obviously we can talk about the body transformation. I think that's a big step, or a big reason why Baltimore is going to take a big step in 2024, because in my opinion, if you get Lamar Jackson feeling confident in his body, like we saw him be in 2019, 2020, before he put on that weight, I think it's just a whole different Lamar Jackson. But he felt so confident during the interview that he had, where again, it inspires a lot of confidence in me that he's going to be able to hit that extra gear that we haven't necessarily seen out of him in a couple of years. Not that he hasn't had extra gears. He's still Lamar Jackson, and he was Lamar Jackson even with his weight being a little more up there. But I still think, the extra gear, however many gears you want to go up, he didn't have that necessarily. So he even said it's been a while, right? COVID happened to us, slowed it down a little bit. That's what Lamar said. He feels great now. He feels great. So that's a big part of this whole thing, where Lamar, I think, is going to be balanced this season. This offense is going to make him into a more well-rounded player. Not that he's not well-rounded already, right? Don't take that the wrong way. He's a good runner. He's a good thrower. Does it all well. He's a dual threat quarterback, and that's what makes this Ravens offense dangerous. But in my opinion, in order for Baltimore to take the next step, I would love to see Baltimore showcase Lamar Jackson's arm. And part of that, we have to acknowledge something here. Part of that has to be getting the deep ball going for Lamar and the offense. But Lamar, after being a fine deep ball passer his first 4 or 5 years in the league, has really struggled in that category the last 2 years with consistency. We know he has the arm strength. We know he can hit these throws. We've seen him hit those throws before. But the past 2 years, it has been decently inconsistent in terms of what the Ravens and Lamar can do together. I'm not pinning it all on Lamar. Lamar made a lot of good throws last season, but he also had ones that sailed over wide receivers' head. They were underthrown as well. But then he also had deep ball opportunities that were dropped, right? He laid the ball on a wide receiver, and a wide receiver dropped the pass, or it was a tip ball interception that wasn't Lamar's fault. So Lamar has to improve in that area, but it's not all on Lamar. I expect Baltimore to try to open up the deep game a little more this season, whether they want to use Zay Flowers or Rashad Bateman in that role again, or if they want to cook up packages for Tez Walker or another player. I think that they should utilize that. And sometimes, you just want to use a guy up the seam, do it with Mark Andrews, do it with Isaiah Likely. They have other pass-catching weapons. And Lamar was actually asked about if there's another level to Todd Monken's offense this season. And he said, quote, "I believe so. I believe the sky is the limit. I always say that, but I believe the sky is the limit for us. We're doing new things out here with the offense. Is more verbal, more verbiage for me, if anything, but looking good so far." That's what I'm talking about. There is a stark difference for most teams between a year one offensive coordinator, a year one offense, and a year two offense. They didn't completely tear down everything Greg Roman built, but it's always a feeling out process. And I think that's why it was kind of impressive how, even though there were the early season inconsistencies, Baltimore got it together and turned in one of the more dominant offenses in this league, where we saw them put up 40s and 45s and high 30s all the time. And you're not really batting an eye at the end of the season when they're dismantling San Francisco, dismantling Miami, these top tier teams, where we always thought that was going to be a tough stretch in their schedule at the end of the season. And they passed it with flying colors. So the offseason, I think, helped everybody out, and it's going to be important. Plus, guys are in the building, right? That's something that is not the be-all, end-all. You're not going to win a Super Bowl because of that, but it sets a tone where guys are at OTAs, and you're building that camaraderie. And you got vets there like Lamar and Derrick Henry and Zay and Rashad Bateman. Not that Zay's a vet or anything. He's in year two, but you have people showing up to this feeling confident and getting the work in with the coaches. The guys who chose not to show up, I mean, that's within their right. It's important to have everybody there, in my opinion. But again, just because you don't have somebody there doesn't mean you're not winning the Super Bowl. Just because someone shows up doesn't mean you are. So there are multiple levels to it. But if Baltimore's a more balanced offense this season, still play to your strengths in the run game, but also is get the passing game going more consistently. And look, part of the reason it was so split was because Baltimore sometimes was just dominant over teams. They were just trying to get out of the game, right? So just run the clock down, play ball control offense. Hopefully that's the case this season where they're dominating teams by so much that they can do that same thing again. But there were times where they just didn't need to run the ball or didn't need to throw the ball, They needed to run it to get out of the game. But to throw the ball, it's like, oh, if there's an incompletion, you stop the clock. Let's just get out of this thing. So it is circumstantial. I'm not saying that every single attempt was calculated and meaningful in terms of the actual outcome of the game. But when Baltimore's in those situations, I'm going to be curious to see how it all works out. But I think Lamar's ready for this season. I think he's ready to take the next step with the offense. I mean, the motivation factor is certainly there too. But when just talking about taking the next step from a year one to a year two offense, we're going to see how it all plays out for them. But kind of in the second part of the show, we'll keep talking about it, talking about Todd Monken's comments a little bit as well and how what he said could translate to 2024's group taking a step forward from last year. Stay tuned, plenty to talk about on the show. First, this show is brought to you by Gametime. I'm super excited for the NBA Finals personally, and it'd be super cool to go to a game. Now, Gametime makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, view receipt, and the lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Now, on the Gametime app, there are going to be NBA Finals tickets on there, but also there are very high-profile events in the Baltimore area. I mean, the Orioles obviously playing some baseball. The Ravens are going to be getting back into full swing in a couple of months here. But for me, if I had to pick a game to go to in the NBA Finals, I'd probably pick a closeout game. Now, that's never predictable. You can't really predict when that happens. So maybe game one, like the opening game of the Finals. The Celtics are in there after sweeping the Pacers. We'll see if the Mavericks can join them. But there are a bunch of features on the Gametime app that make it super easy to use. And my favorite, the last-minute deals on the Gametime app. You can save it at 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. Plus, there are other features just lined up on the Gametime app. And to me, the experience is so good because of them. They have flash deals, zone deals, all-in pricing, seat views. They also have lowest price guarantee, Gametime ticket coverage, and so much more. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, spell LOCKEDO on NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're back for our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here on this Tuesday. Really appreciate everybody again for making Locked On Ravens a part of your day. Be sure to subscribe, video form, audio form, 4 or 5 days a week, plus more of daily Ravens coverage. Let's get into the Ravens offense a little bit more as well. We talked about it from Lamar Jackson's perspective, and we threw Todd Monken a bit in there as well. But I want to get into some of Todd Monken's comments that he had to say, which, again, we've talked about on the show over the course of the last week or so. But I want to do more of a deep dive into those comments. So he talked, we know he took accountability for the championship game and made sure, there were a lot of questions about it, and rightfully so. We had a whole episode on that on Friday, so be sure to check that out if you want more AFC championship comments from Todd Monken. But he was asked about how Derrick Henry shifts the equation for him in the offense, and is there something, to look at more in the offense? And he said he didn't really see it that way because Gus Edwards had a tremendous year, yards, touchdowns, etc. Now, for him, it's important because Derrick Henry, he said he's been there the whole offseason, but the versatility for Henry being a really dominant rusher, but also being a great receiver out of the backfield. I think that's one of the most underrated, if not the most underrated part of Derrick Henry's game, is he can catch the ball out of the backfield plus his speed. I think everybody looks at the frame, looks at the power, and says, oh yeah, this guy's just a bruiser. But Henry has that underrated speed element to him as well. So Todd Monken mentioned getting the ball to Derrick Henry, throwing it to him out on the perimeter, seeing if some defensive backs can tackle him. And that's what it is, because sometimes you have to scheme open matchups, where if you scheme those open, you're going to be able to benefit off of those. Derrick Henry going up against a defensive back in the flat is a lot better than him going up against, 300-pound defensive lineman in the middle of the offensive line, in the middle of the trenches, which Derrick Henry, again, he can get past those guys. He's literally Derrick Henry. But against defensive backs, it's just such a matchup nightmare for the opposing defense. And Monken also talked about how, look, if Derrick Henry's running the ball 300 times, means they're probably doing pretty well. So they're not going to abandon the run game. They're not going to abandon their identity. Part of the reason Todd Monken was brought in as the Ravens offensive coordinator last offseason was because of his adaptability. Todd Monken can run a pass-heavy offense. Todd Monken can run a run-heavy offense. He can do everything. He adapts to his personnel, and that adaptability helped. I mean, we talked about it all last offseason with Patrick Ricard, where it's like, okay, what's his role going to be? Does he really fit into a Todd Monken offense? Is Todd Monken going to want him to be a part of his offense last year? And we know that Ricard played a really big role for what Baltimore wanted to do last season. So Monken is not going to get away from what Baltimore is good at. And they can do both. They're good at both, but we know that this is a run-first team, and I think they're going to lean into the offense a little bit more because of the fact, and I've talked about this before, this is Todd Monken's offensive line now. Monken inherited, we talk about a lot that Monken inherited from Greg Roman, personnel-wise, receivers and running backs and whatnot, but the offensive line was also a Greg Roman offense. A lot of vets on that line. It seemed like he really wanted to move away from that and go younger and more athletic. And they did. They got younger and more athletic, where they bring in Roger Rosengarten. The athleticism is certainly there. Ben Cleveland, we're going to see how he holds up. I mean, and we don't know. None of these guys have won the starting jobs, right? We have to have that competition play out. But it feels like the Ravens really want to go, and Monken really wanted to go in a different direction. And that, to me, kind of signals that they want to get guys out into space a lot more. And that benefits Baltimore, I think, in a lot of different ways, including getting the balls to the wide receiver as well, right? Receivers like Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman, and both Lamar Jackson and Todd Monken talked about getting Rashad Bateman more involved in the offense. And Monken talked about how Odell at the beginning and Bateman missed off-season workouts, and then Bateman got banged up a little bit, and Odell did too. So it was in and out and in and out and in and out. And this is all sports. A huge thing is health. We've talked about Bateman. We literally talked about him yesterday on the show. He has to stay healthy first and foremost, but both Lamar and Todd Monken made it a point to talk about Rashad Bateman. Zay Flowers was asked about Rashad Bateman. He expressed his belief. It seems like this offense believes, and despite the unfortunate ends of their year last year, they are probably going to use that as motivation. So you have to be able to kind of figure out how to scheme these guys up and scheme these guys open. I think Monken, again, forced it a bit with Zay at the beginning of last season, but he went away from it as well. So to me, I think the offensive line too, no more rotations. Hopefully we're done with that. I don't think they would do that with Rosengarten or anything like that. I mean, Stanley, I think that would be probably like a worst case scenario. But again, Monken was asked about, the more athletic offensive line. He said, he didn't know if he was looking for it, but, people looking for the same guys, big, smart, physical, etc. That's the type of thing that the Ravens, I think, were looking for, even if Monken doesn't actually come out and outright say that as well. But he was also asked about Lamar's weight a little bit and said he looks great. He's worked hard and getting there, talked about the motivation factor as well, and said that, it was disappointing, but he's fired up for where the offense is headed. And part of that is, again, I think getting the deep passing game going, becoming a bit more balanced with the run pass, and just not going away. I mean, obviously they didn't really go away from what they were good at until the AFC Championship game, so that's a whole different conversation. But I do think that they're relying on a lot of players to take leaps. This is going to be a big leap year for a lot of players. Rashad Bateman being one of them, Ben Cleveland, whoever else you want, Isaiah Likely taking a next step, right? Ronnie Stanley, can he bounce back? The offense, if everybody hits, and it's not realistic that every single player is going to hit. It's just in all the sports, not realistic. But for the offense in Baltimore, we already know that their ceiling is so high. And their floor is honestly pretty high too in the regular season, right? But if they can just raise those a little more each, the floor and the ceiling, I think it will give them a lot more confidence heading into the playoffs. I think they have learned from last playoffs. And again, if all these guys can take leaps, it could be a really big season for the Baltimore offense. And I think they are poised to take a big step forward this year. Coming on the final part of the show, we'll talk about a bit more if another move is incoming for the Ravens. Are they going to make another move? Are they in a rush to make a move? Should they be in a rush? Stay tuned. We got a lot to get to on the show. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big one of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet, $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. So for that Ravens and Chiefs game in week 1, first game of the season, Ravens open up as 2.5-point underdogs against the Chiefs. So if you like that money line, you can go over there, bet on FanDuel, but the line will probably change over the course of the next couple of months. So if you want to bet player props there, you can as well. Plus for the NBA Finals, the Celtics are in. We'll see if it's the Mavericks or the Timberwolves. Mavericks up 3 at the time of this recording. So if you want to bet over there on FanDuel on those lines, be sure to get over there and do it. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. We are back. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostreicher here with you. We're gearing up for the start of the 2024 season. Still a couple months away, obviously, but I really appreciate everybody sticking with me, even in the quote-unquote lull periods of the offseason. We're 5 days a week, regardless of when it is, during the season, off-season, dead periods of the offseason. Every single weekday, we are here for you, plus more bonus content. So if you want that, if you're craving that Baltimore Daily Ravens content, we have it for you here on Locked On Ravens, both in video form and in audio form. So if you want to watch one day, listen another, you're not missing out on any of the content. It's the same show, both audio and video. Now, the Ravens, they've gone through free agency, they've gone through the draft, but there are other avenues for them to make a move still, despite the fact that that's all done. Free agency is not done. It's never ending, really. And we saw that last year when the Ravens added veteran after veteran after veteran after the draft happened. They go out there and they signed Odell before the draft, but it was Brock Yassin coming in, Arthur Millette coming in, Jadeveon Clowney, Kyle Van Noy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They hit on all those guys, and it feels like the Ravens, it's a little bit of a youth movement for them this season in a lot of different positions where they lost so many players. They're going to rely on a bunch of second-year guys, third-year guys, fourth-year guys, even some rookies to step up and play massive roles for the team. And that's a choice. I mean, again, I think that part of the reason why is because the Ravens, with Lamar's contract and all the other big contracts, they can't just go out there and spend as much money as they want to. But I also think they're just waiting for the right opportunity. There's another move incoming for the Ravens. I'd be shocked if they just stood pat for the rest of the offseason. I think that there will be one move, at least one move for them. We've talked a lot about safety depth, really ever since the draft ended, when they didn't really address the position until the 7th round, and undrafted free agency too. So whether it is Jamal Adams they had for a visit in a week ago, or they go out there and they sign another wide receiver, edge guy, defensive line, whatever position, again, I'd be shocked if Baltimore stays pat leading up to the regular season. I think that they still have a couple of roster holes. I think a veteran offensive lineman wouldn't hurt anybody, even if it is just can't body for training camp, just a battle. Doesn't even have to be a guy that makes the final roster, but I think it'd be nice to have some more offensive line depth. But to me, the Ravens don't necessarily have to be in a rush in this whole thing. They only need to be in a rush if they have the target on a specific guy and there's other league-wide interest, which is pretty, I wouldn't count that out. I think that there is a possibility that for multiple guys, they have interest. Maybe they're waiting for price point to come down. And some guys, they just want to wait until the regular season is close, right? So they don't have to go through all of the OTAs, and if they sign to a team and they don't show up for the voluntary stuff, it's like, oh, do they really do? Is there any motivation? This, that, and the other. There are some negative storylines that come out when that happens, which I think is a little bit of an overreaction personally, but it's what happens. So for a guy like Jadeveon Clowney, for example, who signed for the literal first time before training camp, I think it was before training camp. First time ever he did it was this offseason because Carolina offered him one heck of a contract. But he didn't like to sign before training camp because he didn't want to go through all of those workouts. He just wanted to do his own thing, train his own way, not have to deal with that. And then he came in and did his thing. Guys are like that. Guys just don't want to sign at this point. So as we get closer to training camp, to the regular season, I expect there to be more activity. But in terms of signings, I mean, not a lot of guys really sign at this point. It is that lull period after the draft and before training camp where you just don't get a lot of guys moving around. Guys are in their routines. Guys want to finish those up, and then they'll make a decision. And it kind of benefits them because a lot of the other guys are in the same boat where there aren't any deals being made and things are just kind of at a standstill. So the guys who are on the roster right now, that's fine. And it's why I think free agency, you either want to sign pretty early or you sign late. In the middle gets a little bit dicey. So I do think Baltimore should add another safety at some point. They can't go into the year, in my opinion, with two rookies, two late round guys, 7th rounder and undrafted at that position. Again, we talked about the offensive line, another wide receiver, but it's not only just about free agency. They could potentially make a trade. Is that trading for a depth piece? It's trading for an instant impact playmaker. I think if they were to make a trade, wide receiver does make the most sense. There are enough quality safeties out there where I don't think you need to spend draft capital to add at that position. Wide receiver, I think it's kind of the opposite, where I really think Michael Thomas is the only guy I'd consider. But we'll talk about this more in depth on the show in the coming days, coming weeks, and dedicate more time to it, because we're almost in June now. We're just a couple days out, and I wouldn't expect a bunch of big moves up until probably early July or even mid-July, right around before training camp starts, then even throughout training camp. And that's another thing where injuries will happen in training camp. It's unfortunate. You never want to see it, but injuries will happen. And some guys are just waiting for other opportunities to open up, right? Maybe on a contender. So, some contender loses a position, and there's a guy out there that's all right, and an opportunity is opened up. That's sometimes how this works too, where teams aren't in rushes and players aren't in rushes. So that means nobody's in a rush, and that means nothing happens. So it can be a little bit of a down period, but I still expect Baltimore to do something before the season starts. And whether that is a free agent move, whether that is a trade, we'll just have to wait and see. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Really appreciate everybody tuning in. Be sure to subscribe, follow along video form and audio form if you do want 5 days per week plus more of daily Ravens coverage. Coming up tomorrow, we will have more Ravens content for you. So be sure to stay tuned. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.